the 25-year-old Houston man who was reported missing for 8 years from Rudy himself. First, let's take a look at how we got here.
All this time, I wanted to live a full and independent life. However, something in my mind constantly forced me to listen to my mother. Overall, this wasn't surprising, since, in some way, my mom was my only support in life. If someone came to our home, she would tell me to stay in my room, lock the door, and make not a single sound. Of course, there were also times when she would lock me in there herself, supposedly for my own safety. I kept asking her when I would finally be able to become a normal person, when I would get the chance to find a job, and of course, when I would have my own car. Out of all my questions, though, the one that mattered most was simply, when would I become a free person, able to make my own decisions? Those were the first words spoken by 25-year-old Texas native Rudolph Farias after his release from the captivity of his own mother. His mysterious story echoed around the world and became somewhat unique. Local authorities believed him to be missing, but as it turned out, the young man had never disappeared at all. In reality, his own mother had kept him locked up in their home for 8 years. Undoubtedly, there will always be people whose actions remain unfathomable to most. Some of these actions are rather horrific by nature, while others are more mysterious. But the truth is that both types of events occur in real life. A striking example of inexplicable behavior from one's closest person is the story of Rudy Farias. This story begins in 2015. Rudolph Gabriel Farias IV, also known as Rudy, was born on October 1, 1997 in Houston, Texas, USA. He was the son of Rudolph Farias III, a war veteran and Houston police officer, and Jane Santana. Rudy's mother had another son, born during her relationship with a previous partner. Rudy's older brother, Charles, was 8 years older than our hero today. Very little is still known about the young man's childhood. What we can say is that he was a rather quiet child, looking up to his older brother in all things. He even considered him his best friend. In 2011, Rudy, who was only 13 at the time, had to face the first serious tragedy of his young life, the death of his older brother. The young man had died in a horrific motorcycle accident. Rudy's relatives noted that he was never able to recover from this loss. In fact, they said that, at one point, he even attempted to harm himself. A few years later, the young man was faced with another tragedy, the death of his father. This time, his father succumbed to overwhelming emotions following a scandalous dismissal from the police force and ultimately harmed himself in a way that would change everything. It turned out that Rudy's father, along with several colleagues, had been involved in a fraudulent scheme manipulating speeding tickets. According to available information, 4 officers had officially issued over 5,000 fines, totaling around $350,000. As you might expect, all this money had gone straight into their pockets. Soon, the illegal actions of Rudy's father were uncovered by a team of detectives from the Internal Affairs Department. Thus, by the age of 16, Rudolph had already experienced a greater number of tragedies and inner torment than most young people his age. As a result, all these events led to serious mental health issues. He was diagnosed simultaneously with depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety. However, an even greater test awaited him in the future, one that would more closely resemble the plot of a psychological thriller. It all started on March 6, 2015, in Northwest Houston. On that day, Rudy didn't come home after a simple walk with his dogs. The next morning, his mother went to the state police and reported him missing. According to her statement, her son had gone out the night before to walk his pets, but he never returned home. Furthermore, she said that the boy suffered from severe anxiety, depression, and asthma, and he didn't even have his inhaler with him. For some reason, he had forgotten to put it in his jacket pocket before leaving the house. All of this terrified Rudy's mom, and she demanded that authorities search for her boy as quickly as possible. Thus began the case of the missing teenager. Soon, local police officers launched a search. Their first step was to interview all of Rudy's relatives, friends, and neighbors. But, as is often the case, none of them had any information about the young man's whereabouts. In addition to law enforcement, a group of local volunteers joined the search efforts. According to information broadcasted on TV and shared on social media, Rudy was last seen on March 6th at around 7 a.m. He was wearing baggy blue jeans, a black t-shirt, and brown boots. It was also noted that he had an injured right leg, causing him to walk with a slight limp. On top of all this, city authorities warned the public that the missing young man might be in a slightly disoriented state due to not taking certain medications. Several public sources urged anyone with information about his whereabouts to contact the department responsible for missing persons cases. The intensive search for Rudolph continued until March 13th, but it was then suspended due to worsening weather conditions. The intensifying rains had completely soaked the fields and roads. Surprisingly, by that time, Rudy was already back home, yet no one besides his mother knew this fact. What's more, the woman didn't tell anyone that her son had been found, and instead, she kept him locked up for a long 8 years. A week after all search efforts were called off, various volunteer organizations launched a fundraising campaign for the boy's mother, who, due to various circumstances, was struggling financially and in need of regular support. Among other details, the website where the funds were being raised noted the critical state of Rudy's mother's health. It stated that she was mentally, physically, and emotionally drained due to her son's disappearance. The organized efforts quickly gained momentum, and within the first few days, the volunteers managed to raise several $1,000s. The funds were immediately handed over to Rudy's mother, even though, as we know, the young man had already been found by then. Weeks, months, and even years passed after these events, with no new information about Rudolph surfacing during this time. On May 25, 2017, the National Day for Missing Children, several billboards were set up in Houston displaying Rudy's image. Authorities once again aimed to draw the public's attention and hoped to gather any clues that could help locate the young man. At the same time, Rudolph's mother gave a few new interviews to the media. In these, she pleaded for help from local citizens and shared updates on the investigation into her son's disappearance. The woman mentioned that detectives were working on the theory that her son might have been kidnapped by human traffickers, who could have then sold him to other criminals. Additionally, she emphasized how deeply the prolonged uncertainty had affected her, mentioning that she had already endured the loss of one son and simply wouldn't survive going through something like that again. Months passed without any information about the young man, who, all this time, was actually being held within his own home, as if it were a prison. Although Rudy wasn't chained up and probably could have gone outside for some reason, he almost never did. It seems he was subjected to a form of psychological pressure from his mother. Or maybe it was some unstudied version of what we call Stockholm Syndrome. Rudolph's mother skillfully manipulated his mind, telling him that she was the only person he could truly trust. She went so far as to frighten him, saying that the police and other government agencies were searching for him, and that if he dared step outside, he would immediately be arrested and thrown in jail. When her relatives or friends came to visit, Rudy had to hide in his room until the guests left the house. Strangely, during one of these visits, the young man's grandmother happened to catch a glimpse of him. She hurried to tell other relatives, but at first, for some reason, no one believed her. Her family thought she must have imagined it due to her advanced age. However, in September 2018, one of them finally called the police, reporting that the missing young man had been quietly living at home this whole time. Police officers investigated this report, but for some reason, they failed to find Rudolph. In the end, the case was forgotten once again until June 29, 2023. On this day, a man called Houston's emergency number to report that he had found a young man lying unconscious in the middle of the street. A few police officers soon arrived at the scene and brought the young man to consciousness. it turned out that he was none other than Rudolph Farias. A few hours later, local authorities called Rudy's mother to inform her that they had finally found her son, who by this time was already 25 years old. News of the accidental discovery of such a long-lost young man quickly spread across the country's media. In fact, one of the first reports on the case came from the Texas Center for Missing Persons. The center's spokesperson stated that the young man was receiving the necessary medical assistance at a city hospital. When they found Rudolph, they discovered several injuries and bruises on his body. However, his overall physical condition was stable. Around this same time, the Houston Police Department also released a press statement, confirming that the young man had been found. Police officers plan to interview both Rudy and his mother soon to uncover the detailed circumstances of what had happened. Of course, the news of Rudy's miraculous return caused a true stir in the media space. And it's no wonder, after all, he had been missing for 8 long years. Several journalists even managed to reach Rudy's mother for comments. She told them that, in her opinion, her son had been regularly beaten by his captors. Additionally, she mentioned that Rudy appeared highly disoriented and only managed to say a few words before he collapsed, curling up in a fetal position. Among other things, his mother even posted a photograph of her son lying on a hospital bed. However, it later turned out that this photo had actually been taken back in 2012, related to a different incident in Rudy's life. The fact that the young man was found after so many years of being missing sparked immense sympathy from thousands of people worldwide, but what initially seemed like an incredible miracle and a long-awaited reunion between mother and son soon took on an entirely different nature. As time passed, shocking details about the incident began to emerge, turning Rudy's story into something far more complex and even unsettling. Once Rudy's condition had stabilized, police were finally able to have a brief conversation with him and learn more about the circumstances of his disappearance. Apart from law enforcement officials, several local activists who had previously participated in search efforts also attended the meeting. After a short but frank conversation with the detectives, Rudy left with his mother, covering his head with a towel. Although law enforcement representatives refused to speak with the media, reporters still managed to get a few comments from others who were present during the meeting with Rudy. The activists who spoke to reporters essentially lifted the veil of secrecy surrounding the case, and it was then that the story took an unexpected turn. According to the men, Rudy told them that he had never actually disappeared, but had instead been held captive by his own mother, who had allegedly mistreated him all these years. The woman herself did not deny it. In fact, she admitted much of it to the police. Based on information revealed during one of the later press conferences, it seemed that in 2015, Rudy did indeed leave home, but returned a few days later. At that point, Rudy's mother advised him to hide and avoid being seen by others, claiming that local authorities were searching for him to arrest him. Initially, Rudy believed his mother and voluntarily stayed on the property. However, he eventually began to realize that the police had no reason to arrest him. When that happened, his mother resorted to various psychological manipulations. For some inexplicable reason, Rudy found himself complying with everything she demanded, essentially allowing her to imprison him. Additionally, according to some accounts, Rudy's mother allegedly forced him to pretend to be his father and sleep with her regularly while he was completely undressed. After these shocking statements, news outlets, eager to learn more details about this story, began to dig deeper into the Farias family circle. They interviewed close acquaintances and neighbors, and some of those questioned claimed to have seen the young man several times over the past few years. According to them, they even saw Rudolph up close on occasion. Supposedly, he would come to play with one of the neighbor's children. Strangely enough, despite having the chance to leave the house, Rudolph made no attempt to seek help from the police. His mother has since nearly stopped communicating with the media. She only stated that the young man whom the neighbors supposedly saw was not her son, but rather her nephew, who had stayed with her for a while. She even shared a photo of this young man, showing that he looked nothing like Rudy. Another neighbor said he too had seen the young man over the years. According to him, he was astonished to learn that this person had been considered missing all this time. The day Rudy was found by police officers, certain sources claim that this was his final attempt to escape from home. The same sources reveal that over the previous years, Rudolph had tried to contact authorities a few times, using fake names, though these efforts never led to any results. However, the exact nature of these contacts remains unknown. It also came to light that on August 5, 2021, the young man somehow received a traffic fine in South Carolina. Apparently, the officers who issued this ticket never realized that the person in question was actually Rudy Farias, who seems to have used a false name out of fear. Sometime later, a police officer from the Missing Persons Department managed to speak with Rudolph face to face. The conversation took place in one of the city's hotels and was mostly formal. According to the officer, during their talk, the young man did not mention any crimes committed against him by his own mother. It's possible that Rudolph was simply uncomfortable discussing such matters, though the officer believed that the young man did not mention it because nothing of the sort had actually happened. Despite earlier claims, Rudy's mother faced charges only for misleading police officers by reporting her son as missing. This decision was made because authorities were unable to confirm that Rudy had truly been a victim of psychological manipulation that somehow kept him confined to the house. Nevertheless, the local police chief warned the public that they would continue investigating Rudy's mother, indicating that further charges against her might still be possible in the future. Additionally, it was announced that charges could be brought against Rudy himself, but only if detectives determined that he willingly went along with his mother's instructions and chose to stay in the house of his own accord. Over time, more and more questions arose from ordinary people, many of whom had been actively involved in the search for Rudy, supporting his mother in any way they could. Concerned citizens generally described the case as strange and unusual. Representatives of the organization that hosted a fundraiser for Rudy's mother even published a statement saying that she was permanently banned from their platform and would no longer be able to profit from it in the future. Later, on July 7, 2023, various activists gathered for a protest demanding punishment for the woman's actions. In the protesters' view, Rudy's mother had not only deceived various governmental and public organizations, but had also used a form of targeted aggression against her own son. In other words, the public heavily criticized the officials who had imposed such controversial measures that, in essence, did nothing to punish the woman who had kept her son confined for so long. Furthermore, the same activist who had first spoken with Rudy believed that his mother had committed no less than a crime against her son's physical integrity. He argued that Rudy needed to be separated from his mother as soon as possible, fearing that if left alone with him, she could continue to use various forms of psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, details of another investigation emerged, initiated by a local nonprofit organization that had been involved in the search for Rudy. They hired a private investigator who determined that Rudy's mother might have suffered from a rare disorder known as Munchausen syndrome. This disorder is a type of factitious disorder where, in most cases, a person pretends to be ill and may even induce symptoms in themselves to gain attention and care from others. However, there are other forms of the disorder in which a person seeks out or exaggerates ailments in those close to them, often targeting their children. Overall, this is hardly surprising. Children, due to various inherent factors, are often much more susceptible, especially if the influence comes from a parent. On July 11th, Rudy Farias spoke personally with local media for the first time, providing a detailed account of what he endured over the years of his confinement. The young man explained that, despite the fact that his mother didn't put him in handcuffs or restrain him with chains, it was extremely difficult for him to leave the walls of his home. This was largely because his mother manipulated him, using various psychological tactics. Additionally, she continuously planted negative thoughts in his mind, which eventually led to feelings of anxiety and fear for his life. According to Rudy, this was more than enough to keep him feeling imprisoned. As previously mentioned, the woman persuaded her son to stay at home, claiming that if he left, he would immediately be arrested by the police. In addition to what was said before, Rudolph noted that several times, when his relatives came to visit, he wanted to scream and ask for help. However, each time he remembered his mother's words, which stopped him and literally forced him to stay calm. As for the accusations of sexual assault allegedly committed by the woman, this time Rudy stated that nothing like that happened. At least, he clarified that his mother did not force him to do anything of the sort. However, he did admit that some of her actions still made him feel uncomfortable or even awkward. For example, she wanted to sleep in the same bed with him. According to Rudolph, he agreed that he had become a victim of what is known as Stockholm Syndrome. He claimed that this situation contributed to an intensification of a psychological reaction, where he felt both sympathy, fear, and, at the same time, attachment to his mother. When asked if it was possible for him to have a normal relationship with his mother, Rudy answered that he no longer wanted anything to do with her. As of today, Rudy Farias' whereabouts are unknown. According to reports, the young man changed his name and moved to another city. No charges have been brought against his mother. Law enforcement officials stated that the case against her is still active and ongoing. This means that, in the future, she could face punishment for her actions. This case is unique in its nature. We often hear about fathers and mothers kidnapping their children and doing much worse things to them. However, Rudy's case differs from most other incidents. Well, the investigation is still ongoing, and who knows? Perhaps we will hear more details about what happened.